Hi, thank you so much for having me on. It's such a deep honor to be involved in this important project. I run a group called Parents Defending Education, which is pretty new compared to NAS and some of our other friends on the call. We launched just last year to help parents of students in the K-12 system figure out what the heck was going on. I think as many people saw during lockdown what their children were or were not learning during Zoom school, families were horrified because school today obviously is far different than it was when many of us grew up. And I think obviously in the wake of George Floyd's murder, a lot of schools' activism really kicked into overdrive. We saw districts across the country sending out all district emails saying that they were systemically racist. I think a lot of parents thought, well, what is this? Did you just call me names? And again, curriculum took a big turn. And so when parents had this window into their children's classroom, they were discouraged. And because it was, things have fallen off significantly from what I think many of us recall learning when we were all in school. And so, we have seen over the past year, 2 years, parents rising up, parents becoming deeply, deeply unhappy about what has been taking place in American schools. People are mad about the race and gender theory lessons that are being taught in school that teach children to view each other through the lens of identity politics and pitting each other against their peers. They're mad about the elimination of gifted and talented programs because which are done obviously in the name of equity. So let's bring high achieving students down to a lower level. They're mad that districts are spending finite budget dollars to bring in equity consultants and diversity consultants, making huge amounts of money while our districts plead pauper and go and say that they need to pass new bond initiatives because they don't have enough money for essential things like books or buildings. They're mad that children are having their gender transitioned behind their backs without anybody knowing what's going on. Districts saying parents don't have a right to that information. And they're mad that when they raise these issues to their school board, to their state boards of education, they're mocked by their elected officials and as well as by members of the media. So one thing in getting Parents Defending Education off the ground, in speaking to thousands of parents from across the country over the past 18 months, we have a tip line. People send us things on a daily basis. I mean, since our launch last March, we actually have been receiving between 50 to 200 tips a week from across the country, which is absolutely astonishing. We ask people to send us things, back up. We ask them, send a screenshot, send a PDF, send us hyperlink so that we can prove this and then we can send it out. Bob in Omaha might not know how to get something that's going on in his district to Tucker Carlson, but we can help with that. We have noticed that, as people have gotten smart over the past year, as the scales have fallen from their eyes about what their children are learning or not learning, people last year, when they got smart, this year is the year they wanted to do something about it. And we wanted to give people both the knowledge about what their rights are, as well as, the pieces that they need to go out and be better and more articulate advocates for their children. One of those things that they need is they need alternative curriculum to propose when they see what's going on. Last year, I'm so grateful for everything the National Association of Scholars did in regards to the 1619 project. That was something that was sweeping the country. Last year, we saw even the Department of Education tried to hijack a civics grant program to encourage districts to adopt the 1619 project, to adopt Ibram Kennedy's work. We helped over 12,000 people submit comments to the Federal Register saying, please don't do this. Please use the civics grant program actually for civics. And the Department of Education actually backed off of that. But in that process, we learned in talking to parents that you can't just walk in and say, hey, don't teach this thing. What actually helps is that when you walk in and say, don't teach this thing because of here's how factually inaccurate it is. Thank you again, and National Association of Scholars. But then to go in and say, you know what, would you consider this other curriculum that is more comprehensive, that has more detail, that is, provides a better and more comprehensive look at American history. And so that is, I think, this amazing tool and why I'm so grateful for the launch of the American Birthright Project, because it is a concrete and positive thing that parents can bring to the table. We have noticed recently, the state of Virginia recently put out a study where they asked parents and then they compared what how people thought that their children were doing. I think for 8th grade proficiency levels, about 90% of parents assumed that their children were performing at grade level for reading, writing, mathematics. Unfortunately, what the numbers bore out was that actually only about 36% of students in 8th grade in Virginia are reading, writing, or performing math at grade level. And so there's this tremendous gap in between what people expect their children are learning versus what children are actually learning. And I'm so grateful for Douglas's comments before, because I think there is, schools and states have this huge amount of discretion. one thing that has come on our radar, just as Douglas mentioned, is the ethnic studies debacle that has been sweeping the country. That was very instructive, I think, for many of us who are frankly very new to education reform. I consider myself kind of an accidental activist on this K-12 education front. I didn't know how curriculums were adopted or what the schedule was for any of these things. And when we saw what happened in California last year with the kind of extremely crazy and bombastic first version of the ethnic studies curriculum, when that was first rolled out, it was deeply anti-Semitic. There were a lot of extremely objectionable parts to it, but we saw the citizens of California weigh in through the various iterations of the curriculum's consideration. We were able to dial it back, or parents were able, and community members were able to dial it back to a place where it was not as crazy and hateful as it was, the first version was. But even where they ended up is still, I think, above and beyond where most people are comfortable with. And again, many of us have been gaslit. We've been, accused of wanting to not teach history, to whitewash history. That's not what's taking place whatsoever. But people do have an objection to the kinds of things that are being inserted and the kinds of narratives that have been inserted into social studies curriculum. And then even after, what ended up being a fairly watered down version of the ethics studies bill was passed, we're now seeing local districts take and adopt the original crazy versions, and that did have extremely anti-Semitic components to it. There was recently a lawsuit that was successful, brought by our friends at the California Foundation for Equal Rights, challenging the inclusion of an Aztec prayer in it, where we oppose compelled religion in schools, yet this is something that the California Ethnic Studies curriculum was trying to force through. And so there is power in people weighing in and parents weighing in. But there is, at the end of the day, tremendous power in parents being able to go in and say, this is what I like. And I think not until now has there been one really detailed and extremely comprehensive curriculum for parents to advocate for. There are 5 states right now this year that have social studies curriculum up for review by their state agencies. Colorado, Washington, D.C., Louisiana, Minnesota, and New Mexico all have their social studies curriculums under consideration. As Douglas alluded to, the first version that Minnesota was looking at didn't include the Holocaust in the World War II curriculum. I'm actually not sure how you can talk about World War II without having the Holocaust included, but that's something that Minnesota actually tried to slide in, but thanks to the vigilance of a bunch of education scholars in Minnesota, they were able to call that out. And so, parents are obviously on much stronger footing when they come to the table with concrete solutions, with positive alternatives. And that's why we're so grateful again to the National Association of Scholars and the Civics Alliance for developing this, because it will be a powerful and compelling tool for people to speak to their local school boards, to speak to their state agencies and say, this is what I want, and here is what I wanted. It is clear, it is concise, it is comprehensive, and we're very grateful for all your efforts. So thank you.